Hello, today I'll be talking about 10 more bad metal albums from my collection. Sometime last year I did do a video on 10 bad metal albums from my collection, and if you have not seen that video, make sure to check out that video after this video right here. But in this video again, we'll be talking about 10 more bad metal albums. And this will be in no particular order, but the first album I do want to talk about is from one of the big four of thrash, Anthrax, with their album Stomp 442. From the John Bush era. And when it comes to the John Bush era, I do like Sound of White Noise. I think that's a really good album, and We've Come For You All I think is also a solid album, but this album and Volume 8 are pretty much the biggest reasons why I don't understand how some people prefer this era over the Joey era or the Joey albums. I mean, now if you prefer John Bush's voice in general, now that's one thing I can definitely understand. And I do like both vocalists. I do think John Bush does have a cool voice. I do like his voice. But Stomp 442 to me, there's just not a whole lot that really stands out here in my opinion. I do like Fueled. I think that's maybe one of the best songs from this John Bush era. I do also like Nothing, and I think Random Acts of Senseless Violence is a solid way to open up the album, but the rest of the album, to me, is pretty unremarkable. Some of the songs being some of their worst material, while some others I think are just straight up forgettable. Not a whole lot there that really sticks with you. But yeah, a few decent tracks on it, but overall, not a big fan of it. Always been one of my least favorites from the band. Next, we're moving to the band that you could maybe say started it all when it comes to metal, Black Sabbath, with their album Forbidden. Their final album with Tony Martin, and I do like some of the Tony Martin era. I do like Eternal Idol and Headless Cross. I do like Cross Purposes. I think that album is actually a tad underrated. I never could get into Tear. Personally, I know that album does have its fans, but for me, again, can never really get into Tear. But I do think that album is certainly better than this one, though. Forbidden is easily the band's worst. The production is definitely questionable. I know that they did recently remaster this not too long ago, and I have heard some of the stuff from the remaster, and it definitely does sound better, but I still think this album is easily their weakest, though. Get a Grip is really the only song I like off of here. I think that song is kind of decent, but the rest of the album, to me, is pretty bad to just either that or just straight up forgettable and easily some of the band's worst material. But yeah, Forbidden by Black Sabbath, pretty bad, easily their worst. But now we're moving to one of the leading bands in the world of melodic death metal, or Melodeath, In Flames, with their album Battles. This album basically continues the direction that they went on Siren Charms. Except I think this album is slightly better than that one, but not by much, though. I mean, there's maybe a couple or a few decent to okay songs on here. Drained and Wallflower, I think, are all right, but still not songs that I really return to all that much either. And Through My Eyes, I think, is also kind of all right, but the rest of the album just does nothing for me. This alt metal direction that they did throughout the 2010s, or at least a good amount of the 2010s, just not a big fan of what they did in the 2010s in general. I mean, yeah, you had this album, you had Siren Charms, which I think is easily the worst one. Then you also had Eye the Mask, which I think is, out of the albums that they did in the 2010s, I think Eye the Mask is probably the best one, which is not saying much because my opinion over time on that album is kind of lowered, but I still think that album has a few decent tracks on it. Then you have Sounds of a Playground Fading, which I think also has a few decent tracks. There was a time where I did kind of like the album, but nowadays the album doesn't do a whole lot for me, but again, has a couple decent tracks on it. But yeah, Battles, pretty bad album, easily one of the band's worst. And now we're moving to Judas Priest with Nostradamus. Definitely no secret that this album is very bloated, definitely overstays its welcome with its runtime, and there's just not a whole lot here that really stands out here. If I remember correctly, Prophecy is one of the better songs off of here, and same with maybe the title track, but yeah, there's just Whenever I'm in the mood for Judas Priest, this is an album that I rarely ever reach for, and I think this album, along with Demolition, are easily the band's worst. Definitely their weakest material, and yeah, I mean, with this album, the band tried to do something different, tried to do something new, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it just did not work for me. This album does have its fans from what I've seen, but I know this is still another more divisive album within their discography. And for understandable reasons, for sure. But yeah, for me, never been a fan of this album. But next we're moving to arguably the band that started it all when it comes to nu metal. And that band is, of course, Korn, with their album The Path of Totality from 2011. Now, 2011 was a year that definitely had its share of duds, though. I mean, it wasn't just this album. That year also had Dedicated to Chaos by Queensryche, and of course that Lulu album that Metallica did with Lou Reed. I'm also not a fan of Lou Reed, so that album was definitely doomed from the start for me. But yeah, Path of Totality. This to me is the only dud in their discography. I know some people don't like Untitled. That album has actually grown on me over time. I still think it's easily one of the weakest. Definitely, that's probably something that'll never change. But I still think the album is at least all right. There's some decent tracks on there, like Starting Over and Evolution, Hold On, and Innocent Bystander. But yeah, Path of Totality. They decided to go into dubstep, and because of that, this album now feels kind of dated a little bit. I mean, but with that said, even with this dubstep direction, I think there's a couple decent tracks on here. Narcissistic Cannibal, I think, is decent though. Same with Get Up. I believe this song is a bonus track, but Fuels the Comedy, I think, is another okay song off of here. But yeah, outside of that, they decided to do something different, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it just did not work for me. I remember when the album came out and being pretty disappointed. But yeah, not a good album. Easily the band's weakest. But now moving to one of the German big four of thrash, Kreator, with their album Outcast. I'm sure when people bring up Kreator, I'm sure many people would probably bring up Indorama when it comes to bad albums. But this might be a hot take. I don't know. But I personally find Indorama at least a more interesting listen than this one. Because, I mean, Indorama, yeah, it's not a great album, but at least that album has a few decent tracks on it. I like Golden Age. I even think the title track is actually all right. Shadowland, if I got the title right, I think that song is also okay off that album. But yeah, Indorama has a few decent tracks on it, but still, of course, not great either. But when it comes to Outkast, I just find this album to be pretty lame. I think the first 3 songs are pretty good, but after that, the album just falls off a cliff for me. I mean, this album is just not Kreator. I mean, this album is maybe the start of them starting to really incorporate some gothic metal elements, but they really go even harder with that gothic metal thing, with the next album, of course, being Indorama. But with this album, especially from track 4 on, I just start getting pretty bored with this album real quick. I mean, Enemy Unseen, if I remember correctly, had some okay riffs, but not enough to save the song either. But yeah, I do like the first 3 songs though. Leave This World Behind, decent way to open up the album. I do like Phobia, which is maybe the biggest song on here. I do like that one. Forever, I think, is also pretty good. A song that definitely leans more towards the gothic metal direction that they were going for at the time, but I still think that song's actually decent. But again, the rest of the album I can definitely live without. But yeah, Outkast, not a great album, definitely one of their weakest. And now I'm moving to Machine Head with Catharsis. And yeah, this album is definitely a giant turd. Picking the worst Machine Head album, it's got to be either this one or Supercharger. But with this album, I do like Volatile and Kaleidoscope, but the rest of the album can go in a bin. I mean, even the songwriting is embarrassing. You even get some pretty edgy, bad lyrics in here, especially when you go to songs like Triple Beam and Razorblade Smile. which, if I remember correctly, Razorblade Smile is a tribute to Lemmy. If I remember correctly, one of the songs in the second half of this album is a tribute to him, but I'm pretty sure it's that song. But either way, I could be wrong. But either way, pretty bad album. Bastards, another pretty bad song off of here. Same with California Bleeding, but yeah, definitely a big low point for the band. And yeah, this album and Supercharger, definitely the band's biggest turds. And now we'll be moving to one of the biggest names in the world of industrial metal, Ministry, and we'll be talking about Americant. Now, Ministry definitely has a good share of turds in their discography. I mean, Animostomia, however you pronounce that, I thought that was their last decent album. After that, their discography pretty much goes off a cliff for me. But after that album, Animosta, again, however you pronounce that album, after that album, I think Moral Hygiene is the only one that I think is semi alright, but still not great though. But when it comes to bottom of the barrel Ministry, this album is definitely in competition of being at the bottom. I mean, there's just nothing here that stands out, and I don't really like any of the songs on here. I mean, this is just pretty bottom of the barrel stuff. And yeah, from what I remember, this is maybe definitely one of their more hated albums, maybe their most hated album. And yeah, an album that I have no desire to return to ever again. It's bad. Don't listen to it. But now we're moving into one of the leading bands in progressive metal, Queensryche, and we'll be talking about one of the most unnecessary albums of all time, and that album is Operation Mindcrime 2. This album is a huge waste of time. Definitely, it's not worth the listen. Now, if I remember correctly, one of the songs on here it features Dio. I can't remember which. Oh, it might be The Hands. I can't remember, but either way, I thought his feature was kind of cool on this album. But outside of that, this album is pretty lame, and from what I've heard, even not all the band members were even interested in doing this sequel. I believe it was Jeff Tate and I believe someone else that was only interested in doing this. And then another thing I heard was that there was multiple session musicians for this album, and yeah, it definitely shows. I mean, even when it comes to the riff department, there isn't really anything that really stands out here. And I mean, I'm American, one of the more okay songs off here, but still not something that I ever really return to either. And not even Jeff Tate can even save this album either. I mean, I understand that over the years your voice will start to take a downturn a little bit just due to wear and tear from touring and all that. I get all that, but again, even his vocals on here couldn't save the album. I mean, this album is just bad. And the 2000s in general was just not a good decade for Queensryche. I mean, I think Tribe is the only okay thing that they did in the 2000s. I mean, yeah, it's not great, but I think it's actually kind of decent. I think there was some decent stuff on there, like Open, The Art of Life, Blood, and Desert Dance, and some others. But this album is definitely one of the band's biggest turds for sure. Dedicated to Chaos is probably the worst one, but this one's not too far behind though. Again, pretty bad album and a sequel that definitely screams unnecessary and in general just a waste of time. Kind of one of those things where it's just like, why? But moving to the final album for this video, and out of all the albums here, this is maybe the most decent sounding one, maybe, depending on who you ask. But Sepultura, Alex. I know this album has its fans, but this is just an album I've tried to get into, but it just doesn't quite do it for me. It's a concept album based on A Clockwork Orange, if I remember correctly, and yeah, this album just does nothing for me. A few decent tracks on here. I like Filthy Rot. We've Lost You, I think, is okay. Same with The Treatment, also alright, but there's just not a whole lot here that really sticks with me. And especially when you move towards the second half, things start to get pretty forgettable in that side of the album. But yeah, for maybe maybe 2 or 3 okay songs, but I don't know. This is an album that I've always struggled to get into. Just maybe at some point I'll give it another chance, but as of now, this album is just, again, has just done nothing for me. And for me, one of their weakest. And the Derek Green era is kind of hit or miss for me when it comes to the Derek Green albums. I mean, I know some people don't like Against. I mean, but I actually like Against. I think it's maybe, I don't know if it's a hot take, but I think it's maybe one of the better Derek Green albums. I mean, yeah, it's basically Roots Part 2, except not as good, obviously. But even with that said, I still think Against is actually decent. There's some decent stuff on there, like the title track. I think Choke is actually pretty good. I think Old Earth is kind of an underrated cut off that album. I also like Dante. I think that's album's also kind of underrated. And then move towards some of the more recent stuff. I think Machine Messiah and Quadra are also pretty solid. But yeah, even when it comes to the Derek Green albums, they're just albums that I definitely enjoy much more than this one. But not really sure how people feel about this album nowadays. But for me, it's always been one of my least favorites. And whenever I'm in the mood for Sepultura, it's an album that I rarely ever reach for. Maybe never, but even when it comes to the Derek Green stuff too. But yeah. Anyways, those are 10 more bad metal albums from my collection. Let me know your thoughts on these albums here. Let me know if you're actually a fan of any of these albums. And if so, let me know some of your favorite, least favorite songs off of some of these albums too. And let me know if you've actually seen any of these bands live. I have seen some of these bands live too. And let me know if you can think of more bad metal albums from your or whether it be in or not in your collection in the comment section below and all the good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and a like, subscribe. Have a nice day and take care.